Welcome to the Institute of All Intelligent Life. My name is Allan Keislar, and we are continuing our class on extraterrestrial spirituality. Actually, we're getting towards the end of the class. This is the last 2 weeks. This week and next week are the last 2 weeks of the scheduled class. So I'm going to try to start wrapping things up. There are two very, very important ideas, probably the most important or critical or fundamental or difficult ideas of this whole course. And that is talking about the aspects or the expansions of Allah. That is, how does Allah, the original source of everything, the intelligent infinity, as the Law of One books name that original source of everything, how does that original reality, one, become many? So this is a great mystery. We have discussed two other very important things that are very closely related to what we are going to be talking about today and in the next class. We have discussed the thought adjusters, that is, how Allah, how the original source of everything, is present within our hearts. And as the Urantia book describes it, that is the mystery of mysteries. It is a very difficult idea to understand, or maybe it's not quite possible for us to understand it with our own intelligence or our own minds, but nevertheless it explains that it is a fact, and we have to try to accept it, even though it may seem to be beyond our understanding. So similarly, the other idea that we were discussing earlier in this course was the idea of the creators, the co-creators, that is, the creators of the material universes, or the material creations, in which each universe, or each creation, is not directly created by Allah, but is created by a subordinate creator or a co-creator, who is not Allah, but who is practically, for all practical purposes, for the creatures within that creation, their creator, and therefore their immediate, we might say, their immediate experience of Allah. So that also is very, very difficult to understand. But nevertheless, this is the information that we've gotten from these extraterrestrial sources. So I am presenting those things as I have received them. And today we're going to begin another topic, which is in some ways maybe even more difficult to understand than those two. And that is this process of Allah's expansion, or presentation of different aspects. We don't really have the right words, I think. We don't really have the concepts. We don't really have perhaps the consciousness, or we don't have the ability to really understand this. It will always seem to be a contradiction, or it will seem to be a mystery to us. Nevertheless, we have to do our best to try to appreciate these things. So, the first thing I want to restate, as I've stated many times already, that God is one. Allah is one. The one source of everything cannot be more than one. So ultimately, there is only one source, one object, one ultimate goal, both the original source and original goal, the beginning of all and the end of all. That is one and can only be one. So we first have to understand that point. And then we can begin this very mysterious exercise, we might even call it, of understanding, this attempt to understand something about how Allah expands. I don't use the word creates, mainly because creation implies something in time, that there was something created which did not exist before. So within material time, everything is created. Everything did not exist before, and it is brought into being, therefore it is created. But what we're talking about today, the aspects or the expansions of Allah, this all happens outside of time, or we might even say before time. All right, that's clear now. Okay, so how do we understand this? The first point is that when Allah creates the first reality other than Allah Himself, that reality must be something quite appropriate, we might say. Of course, as I just explained, we should not really use the word creation. We should not talk about it as a creation, because it exists eternally. Nevertheless, it is an expansion or an aspect of Allah that is in some way different from Allah. Now, I'm just going to say a few things about the nature of that first reality, other than Allah. The Law of One books have described that Allah first exists in and of Himself, without any concept or any awareness even of otherness or manyness or anything else other than Himself. Of course, that is just a way of speaking. But then there exists free will. Free will means that Allah, the original source of everything, chooses to become aware of His own freedom to do something, His own freedom to create something, His own freedom to become aware of something other than Himself. So that results in what is described as love. That is the word. Of course, it means love with a capital L, just like we use the word Lord with a capital L to refer to Allah, and the word Lord with a small l can refer to many beings who are in a superior position. So similarly, love can refer to many different things on different levels, but the one love with a capital L, refers to that first expansion of Allah. Now, how can we use the right words? That it is only appropriate, I guess we might say, that first expansion, love with a capital L, would be something infinite also. Now this is a little hard for us to grasp. How could there be more than one infinite? Well, why not? It seems perhaps a contradiction to our minds. How could there be more than one infinite? Of course, mathematically, we can talk about multiple infinities, but usually when we think in simple, common, everyday, common sense thinking, when we think that there's one infinite, we think there cannot be another infinite. But let's talk about this in a different way. Why should not the first creation, again, understanding that doesn't mean within time, the first reality other than Allah, why should that reality not also be infinite? Okay, I'm going to use a slightly different terminology now. Let us say that first creation of Allah would be a companion of Allah. Now that's a very controversial word. But what I mean is another being, the first being we can say that exists beside Allah, who is created by Allah to be the object of Allah's love, and who will also love Allah. So that being, Allah's first creation, or Allah's first expansion may be a better word, because both of them are eternal, should also be infinite. Because to be a perfect, complete companion, a perfect, complete lover or recipient of love, that being should also be as perfect and complete as imaginable. So therefore, that being should also be infinite. This is, again, a hard concept to grasp, but we are trying to understand this idea the best we can. So I'm sure there are going to be many imperfections in my manner of presentation, but I'm trying to suggest different ways of understanding this. What does it mean when the Law of One, for example, talks about love with a capital L as a different aspect of infinity? In other words, the first reality is described as intelligent infinity, and this reality is described as also infinite, also intelligent, of course, but not the original intelligent infinity, but a subordinate intelligence who's also infinite. All right, that's the first expansion, we might say, the first reality in addition to the one original source of everything. Then the third reality, which is described in the Law of One as light with a capital L. Again, that light doesn't mean the light that we experience, but it means the original energy. Because everything in our creation that we exist within is energy, so we can sort of appreciate that there must be an original energy. So that energy is called light with a capital L. So these are the three original infinite realities. All three of them are infinite. And they have a relationship which is really quite beyond our understanding. Nevertheless, this is how extraterrestrials explain to us, or try to explain to us, maybe, because they also admit that it's hard for them to find the words within our language, whether it's English or any other language, find the adequate words to talk about these concepts. Nevertheless, I'm trying to do the best I can from the information I've been able to gather to describe how these original realities, they're all eternal. It's not that Allah is existing by himself without anything else, ever. Allah always exists with others, with subordinate others who are also infinite. And when time comes into play, that is when things begin that didn't exist before. But before the existence of time, before time starts, we can say, things exist eternally. So their subordination is not in terms of creation within time, but subordination within a concept of philosophical dependence, we can say. That is, A exists alone, independent, B exists subordinate to A, dependent upon A, and C exists subordinate to A and B. But all three, A, B, and C, exist eternally. That's the fundamental point that I've made a number of times throughout this course when trying to describe creation or trying to describe the relationship and the existence of the original realities. So the Law of One really talks about these three, and it's after that that they begin describing a vast multiplicity of many beings. All right, so that's the first point, which I'm going to not go into the second point today. I'll do that in the next class. But this is really, I'm trying to think of other words that I've heard used to describe this. It is like Allah looking outward. The Law of One describes it as Allah looking with free will. That is his own freedom to choose to observe or become aware of otherness, multiplicity, because within Allah everything exists. There is nothing separate. Therefore, when Allah is within Himself only, He's not even aware of anything other than Himself, because everything that exists, that can exist, exists within Him. So, for Allah to become aware of otherness, there must be a looking outward, we can say. So that's basically what we're talking about today, is this process by which Allah looks outward. We might want to say, from our perspective within time, the process by which Allah creates. But I avoid using that word because this is not a creation. This exists eternally. It was not created. It exists always. But it exists in a relationship with Allah. Okay, now the only other point I'm going to stress today is, which I've hinted at before, I have talked about the multiple, millions, billions, I can't give a number to it, but a very, very vast number of spiritual universes that exist. All of them are eternal. All of them are full of light. All of them are full of love. So the question arises, what is the nature of the rulers of those eternal spiritual universes? And this is the next major point I'm trying to make. Just as the original creation, the original aspect of Allah, other than Allah Himself, within Himself, must be infinite in order to be an appropriate companion, is the word I'm using, because that's the reason why Allah creates, is to have other beings with whom He can exchange or reciprocate feelings of love and service, and He can receive service from somebody else. So that original servant of Allah must be infinite. So what I'm saying is, of course, this is a qualified type of infiniteness, you might say, but all of the rulers of those millions of spiritual universes also are infinite. So that's kind of a difficult concept, perhaps, for us to appreciate, but I'm trying to do something that is difficult, admittedly, but that's explain how we need to expand our minds a little bit beyond the way we may have thought in the past. How can there be more than one infinite? And then why should not there be an infinite number of infinites, we might say, but certainly a vast number, much more than we can comprehend. And the ruler, or again, that word is hard to find what that means, but it's not really the creator, because all those infinite spiritual universes are also existing eternally, so they were not really created either. But the being that is responsible for them, we might say, also must be an infinite being. So all of those infinite spiritual universes have an infinite being who is their ruler or controller. They are not Allah. They are not the original source of everything. They're always dependent upon Allah. Nevertheless, they are also all infinite. Okay, that's what I was trying to get across today. I've done the best I can. Now I'm going to see what sorts of questions or comments or reactions we may have gotten from this. All right, so I'm just seeing David Wagner. You are the only person I know who claims communication with extraterrestrial entities. Otherwise, I'd never imagine somebody could take it seriously. And I knew you as a child, and I know you are really embedded in this alternate reality. Well, David, thank you for your comment. There are thousands, probably millions, but certainly many thousands of people. I'm surprised that you haven't heard of them at least, because they're easily available. If you do a little research, you can find there are many thousands of people who claim communication with extraterrestrial entities. If you read the Bible or any scripture, you hear about angels who are extraterrestrial entities, and many people claim communication with angels. So I'm surprised that you say you haven't, perhaps you don't know anybody personally. But I assure you, I have met myself many people who have communicated with extraterrestrials just as I have. All right, Rafi Latif. Love is an attribute of Allah, so love of Allah is also infinite. Oh, that's a very nice way to put it, yes. This is very, very true. I like that statement. Love is an attribute of Allah, so that love, that reality, love with a capital L, also is definitely infinite. Now, what may be a little difficult to understand is that love with a capital L, infinite love, is also an individual, is also a being, is also a conscious entity, an infinite conscious entity. All right, let's see. So Rafia Latif is asking, Sir, what happens to the soul or ruh, a fragment of Allah, of a person whose destiny is hell? This is a very, very good question. It's not what we're talking about today, but it is what we talked about in the last class. In the last class, the whole topic of the class was the soul and the mind and Allah, or Allah within our heart, God within our heart. That is what we have been calling the thought adjuster. So in the last class, we discussed the relationship between the mind, that is our own thinking, and the spirit, that is the thought adjuster, that is God within our heart, and the soul. And this is maybe difficult, maybe different than what you have heard before, but this is the way it's described in the Rancho book. That is where I got this information from that we discussed in the last class, that the soul, this reality, was not eternal in the past. The spirit is eternal in the past. And the mind, in one sense, is eternal. But in any case, there comes a point when we, as an individual, who exists as a combination, that is, there's the body, which is the foundation, you might say. There's the mind, which is the thinking, not the brain acting, but it's the thinking which is superior to the brain. And there is the relationship of that with the eternal spirit, the foundation of everything, Allah, or Allah within our heart. So as a result of this interaction between the spirit, the eternal spirit, and the individual, when the individual makes the choice to listen to or to follow the guidance of the thought adjuster, God within the heart, then the soul comes into being. So this may be a different concept of soul, but it's the result of the moral choice of the material being. And that soul then develops. As we make good choices, that is, as we make choices that are in correspondence with the guidance of the thought adjuster, with the guidance of God within our heart, that soul develops and goes on evolving over a long, long period of time, through many, many levels of existence, until finally, when that soul becomes totally one with the guidance of God, then a new creation comes into existence. That is a combination of the thought adjuster and the individual soul. That's a new type of reality. And once that happens, that is when we become fully surrendered, we might say, when we become a full Muslim, because Muslim means one who is surrendered and who has become peaceful by that surrender. When that surrender becomes complete, then no longer will we be subject to making a wrong decision. We will be totally one with God, one with the will of God. Our will no longer have any separateness from the will of God. So once that happens, then the guarantee is there of the eternality of the soul. But until then, I'm getting back to the question that Rafia Latif asked, what about the person whose destiny is hell? So what that means is, what does it mean, the destiny of hell? What is the destiny of hell? It means when we, hopefully it will be none of us right now, but if we refuse to follow the guidance of God within our heart, if we actually make a choice, a conscious choice to turn away from and to turn against God, then the soul actually becomes, what's the right word? It diminishes. It becomes weakened. Its existence becomes less. And ultimately, if that individual becomes determined, for whatever reason, makes the choice, I'm not going to surrender to God. I'm not going to accept the guidance of God, even though God is my best friend in my heart, is my real eternal beloved. Still rejecting that love, rejecting that help, rejecting that guidance for whatever reason, ultimately then that soul goes into non-existence, and that's hell. When one, actually hell may be the stage before that final annihilation of the soul, when one is, it's horrible to think about it, one is in total anxiety, one is angry. I've witnessed that, actually. It's a horrible condition to be in. And finally, when one totally turns against the light, against love, against God, then one goes to hell. We can say one actually goes into non-existence. So that's the sad destiny of the soul or ruh, who makes that choice, because we have freedom. We always have freedom. Of course, once we become fully surrendered, then not that we lose the freedom, but we will no longer have the possibility of making that choice to turn away from Allah, because we have become one with the fragment of Allah within us, the thought adjuster within us, the infinite fragment within us. Because we're also a fragment, the soul, the ruh. We are a fragment of Allah also, but we're a tiny fragment. And the thought adjuster, or God within our heart, is the infinite fragment of Allah within our heart. So when we finally, it's very, very sad, and everything is done to try and prevent that, but when an individual insists and makes that determination to turn away from God, to reject the light, to not love, then ultimately that is hell, the total annihilation ultimately. All right, a very good question, and I hope the answer is satisfactory. All right, so I'm trying to see the next question. Faizan Khan, dear sir, Pakistani nation show their vote for last messenger and victory against Qadiani. Say something about this. I see whole Pakistan came out with name of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Labbaik ya Rasulullah. I can say something about Qadianism because I have studied it to some extent, sufficiently to know that definitely it is a concoction. It's not a divine truth, and it was actually the British in India, when they were the rulers of India, they realized that they're not going to be able to succeed in conquering the nation fully the way things were, because people had their own religious beliefs, which were very strong. So they made a decision, very, very intelligent. I've said many times the British were extremely clever, cunning, because they really had no morals, but they were able to do anything in order to accomplish their purposes. And their purpose was to try to gain total control over India. And they realized that the way to do this, the only way they could succeed, is if they could undermine religion. So not only Islam, but Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, any religion that they wanted to undermine, they found that the best way to do it is to create a false teacher, create a false religion, which would pose as that religion. So the British actually promoted, and you can even say created, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the founder of Qadiani. So the purpose of that very, very clever attempt was really to undermine Islam. So there are Pakistani Muslims who are aware of this, and they are rejecting Qadianism just for that reason, that they realize that this is not Islam. It's not. It is actually an intentional manipulation of Islam, a creation of something un-Islamic and anti-Islamic, which poses as Islam. So I hope if there are any Qadianis listening, you won't be offended, because we don't have anything against Qadianis, individuals. We don't have anything against any person, but we do feel obliged to point this out because it's the truth. I've studied it, and I'm convinced that yes, this is actually. So, but let me say one more thing. Just because somebody may be within that religious movement, doesn't mean they're a bad person. They may be a good person who has been misled or misguided, or who has somehow inherited from their parents maybe, or somehow a false understanding, and they've become very attached to that. So we shouldn't condemn that person. And certainly the idea that one should attack Qadianis, kill them, burn their businesses, that is not what any good person would do, what to speak of a good follower of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. We must tell the truth, but we must also be kind and loving to everyone, even somebody who is so misled as to be the follower of a movement that was intentionally created to destroy Islam. All right, so Farah Malek, do you think that intuition is actually the thought adjuster trying to guide or nudge us on the right path? Yes, exactly. That is what intuition is. The real intuition is exactly God within our heart guiding us, giving us a nudge, as you say, or giving us a hint, or as we become more purified, as we become more in tune with the will of God, that is, as we become more submitted to the will of God, as we become real Muslims, you could say, what happens? That guidance is no longer just a nudge, it's actual words. We will actually hear the thought adjuster speaking to us. So yes, you are completely right. Intuition is the beginning of our hearing the guidance of the thought adjuster. All right. Irbaz Mahmood Chowdhury. Allan, it's me from Seattle. Where are you from U.S.? I'm not going to talk about these other issues. We're talking about the topic of the class, but I am in California. Sohail Faruqi. Salam, sir. I have a question that I am in a confusion about. You said that to improve densities we need many thousands years. So how we'll get this age? And is Hindu concept of 7 Janams lives is correct in this sense? Not only Hindu concept. Every religion that I know of talks about an afterlife. That is, when we die, when we leave this body, we don't stop existing. We go on to another life. That may be a heaven. If we've lived well, then we go to a higher level. And if we've lived badly, then it can be a lower level, a hellish level. But I don't know this about 7 janams or 7 births, but there can be thousands. It can take a long, long time. There are 7 heavens, yes, that is throughout religious traditions that I've studied, this idea of 7 heavens and 7 hells is very widespread. So I think it's correct that there are many levels, and we go from level to level to level to level, And when we get to the highest heaven, then is when we come to that stage. Generally, when it's more likely at least, we'll come to that stage we've described where the thought adjuster, the supersoul, and the individual soul become fused, become merged, and there's no longer any separate will on the part of the individual soul. So yes, it takes many thousands of years, even millions of years. It can take a long, long time as we progress through these different levels of consciousness, these different heavens, you can say. And we may remain in each heavenly level for a long time or a short time. It can happen very quickly. It doesn't have to take thousands of years. It can happen very quickly also, but that's unusual. All right, Irbaz Mahmood Chowdhury, seems you know a lot about subcontinent history. Well, I taught history of Pakistan studies at Foreman College in Lahore. I was a professor there up until about 10 years ago. So I have studied, yes. In fact, my PhD was in South Asian studies, so I did study the history of the subcontinent also. All right, well, thank you all very, very much for attending this class. I'm happy I was able to give it. I actually was thinking very seriously this evening before that maybe I won't give the class because my health is not very good, but I'm happy that I was able to give the class, but I won't go on any longer now because it is taking a little toll on me to speak. But thank you all very, very much. And this was a very, very deep and difficult concept that I discussed today. So we didn't have too many specific questions on the topic that we were discussing, but that's okay. I do suggest, if you have questions, that you can bring them up in the next class, because the next class is going to be an even more difficult topic, which I myself am struggling to understand, frankly. This topic I've somewhat understood, I think, but the next topic is one that I'm really struggling to understand, and that is Allah internally. We have been talking about Allah looking externally, so next class we're going to be talking about Allah looking internally, which is, I've actually really tried to understand this, and I'll try to explain to you next class. I see we just had one more question from Tahira Sara. Sara, sir, you mean we will have another life after this life on any other planet for another test, and we will forget about this life before going in Jannat? The next life may be Jannat, and it may be that we remember this life, not necessarily that we forget this life. Okay. Well, one more good question from Rafia Latif. I see we're getting a lot of very good questions from her. Thank you, sir. Are the spiritual universes you talked about located in Jannah? In one sense, we can use the word Jannat for the spiritual universes, or we can refer to Jannat as the heavens within this universe, and the word Jannat would then not be used for the spiritual universes. So it all depends on your terminology, what word you use. But there are heavens within this universe, 7 heavens, and there are heavens beyond this universe which are spiritual and eternal. The heavens within this universe are not eternal. They were created. The heavens in the spiritual universes are all eternal. So we can use the word Jannat or heaven for either one. But we should be clear on the distinction between those two, as I just explained. Okay, thank you all very, very much. Peace be with you.